In 1991, a city recorded a murder every 90 minutes. Not during a war, not during a famine. On an ordinary Tuesday, 18 people were killed every single day for an entire year. This was Medellin, Colombia, a city where fear ruled the streets. But today, the same place is studied by urban planners around the world. Tourists drink coffee on streets where car bombs once exploded. Architects fly from Tokyo and Copenhagen to understand its transformation. So how did the murder capital of the world become a blueprint for the future? This is the story of Medellin's impossible comeback. Colombia's second-largest city, tucked into a narrow valley in the Andes, surrounded on all sides by mountains so steep that for decades, they weren't seen as scenery. They were seen as walls. Walls that trapped the poorest families on the hillsides, far from jobs, far from hospitals, far from anyone who could help them. And in that gap, that physical, brutal distance between rich and poor, something monstrous grew. This isn't just a story about crime. It's a story about geography, inequality, and a group of people who asked one radical question. What if the answer to violence wasn't more police, but better design? By the end of this, you'll understand why urban planners now call it the Medellin miracle, and why some people think that word is dangerously wrong. To understand Medellin, you have to understand one man, Pablo Escobar. By the mid-1980s, his cartel controlled an estimated 60% of the world's cocaine supply. He became one of the richest criminals who ever lived. But money wasn't enough. Escobar wanted power, legitimacy, protection. When Colombia moved to extradite drug traffickers to the United States, Escobar declared war. Not a metaphorical one, a real one. He offered $2,000 for every police officer murdered in Medellin. Hundreds of officers died. He detonated car bombs in shopping malls, newspaper offices, even a passenger plane, killing all 107 people on board, just to try to eliminate one political target. By 1991, the homicide rate hit levels no major city on Earth had ever recorded, 381 killings per 100,000 people. For comparison, New York City's worst year ever peaked at just under 31. Do the math, and Medellin was over 10 times more violent than New York City at its most dangerous point in history. But the bombs in the cartel were only half the story. The other half was quieter, and in some ways, crueler. While wealthy neighborhoods in the valley floor had parks, schools, and paved roads, the hillside comunas, packed with displaced families fleeing Colombia's civil war, had almost nothing. No public space, no transportation, no way down the mountain except a 2-hour walk on foot. Cut off from the city below, teenagers in these neighborhoods had two real career paths: stay poor and invisible, or join a gang and become somebody. Escobar didn't create that inequality. He simply harvested it. In 1993, Escobar was finally cornered and killed on a rooftop by Colombian special forces. The world assumed the nightmare was over. It wasn't. With the cartel gone, its territory shattered into dozens of smaller gangs, all fighting over the same streets. Murder rates barely moved. For over a decade after Escobar's death, Medellin remained one of the deadliest cities on the planet. Killing the kingpin hadn't fixed anything. It just proved the problem was never really about one man. The real turning point came almost 10 years later, AI, and it didn't come from a police force. It came from a mathematician. In 2004, a university professor named Sergio Fajardo became mayor of Medellin. He had no political machine behind him, no cartel connections, no old guard loyalty. Fajardo's theory was almost insultingly simple. If violence grows fastest in the neighborhoods, the city forgot I build the city's best buildings exactly there. Not community centers as an afterthought, architectural landmarks, libraries as beautiful as anything downtown, placed deliberately in the poorest, most dangerous comunas in the city. He called it social urbanism. Critics thought it was naive. You don't stop bullets with libraries. But Fajardo wasn't just building buildings. He was solving a transportation problem that had trapped an entire generation on a mountainside. The single biggest barrier keeping the hillside comunas poor wasn't crime. It was distance. A resident of Comuna 13 could spend 2 hours a day just walking down to the valley and back before even starting a job. So in 2004, the city did something no city had done at this scale before. It installed ski lift technology, taken straight from the Alps, and used it to build public transit up a mountain. The Metrocable turned a 2-hour trek into a 7-minute ride, and it plugged directly into the city's metro system, connecting the forgotten hillsides to jobs, hospitals, and universities in the valley, for the price of a single subway fare. This wasn't charity, it was strategy. Every cable car station became an anchor point, AI, and around each one, the city built its landmark libraries, parks, and schools. The most famous is the Biblioteca Espa, a I3 dark, angular stone buildings perched above one of the city's poorest comunas, visible from almost anywhere in the valley below. For the first time, kids growing up in the most dangerous comunas in the Western Hemisphere had a landmark of their own, something that told them, the city sees you. Then came the escalators. In Comuna 13, once so violent that in 2002 the government launched a literal military operation against it. The city installed a series of giant outdoor escalators, climbing nearly 400 vertical feet up the hillside. What used to be a brutal, sometimes dangerous 35-minute climb became a 6-minute ride. Today, Comuna 13 isn't hiding from its past. It's selling it. The same stairwells once patrolled by gunmen are now covered in vivid street art and walked by thousands of tourists a day. Underneath all of it sits something most tourists never notice, a public utility company called EPM, partly owned by the city itself. EPM runs Medellin's water, power, and gas AI, and every year it hands a percentage of its profits directly to the municipal government, funding as much as 30% of the city's entire budget. That single mechanism is what paid for the libraries, the cable cars, the escalators. Medellin didn't wait for foreign aid or a miracle investor. It funded its own transformation from its own light bill. The result? A homicide rate that fell from 381 per 100,000 in 1991 to just 11 per 100,000 in 2024, a drop of nearly 97%. To put that in perspective, Medellin is now statistically safer than Las Vegas, New Orleans, Detroit, Chicago, or Washington, D.C. 6. The hidden cost/controversy. But here's the uncomfortable question underneath the postcard. Did Medellin actually solve violence, AI, or did it just relocate it? Some of the same gang networks that once ran cocaine now run something else: extortion. Local business owners in several comunas still pay a monthly vaccine, a euphemism for protection money, to armed groups that never fully disappeared. And the tourism boom that made Comuna 13 famous has a darker edge. Locals have been pushed out by rising rents as short-term rentals and foreign visitors move in. The very neighborhood that survived a war is now fighting gentrification. There's also a harder truth in the data. In wealthy El Poblado, the murder rate sits around 5 per 100,000. In the poorest comunas, it's still over 100. The averages look miraculous. The map underneath them tells a more complicated story. Inequality didn't disappear. It just got better at hiding. Medellin didn't erase its problems. It renovated the surface faster than it could resolve what's underneath. 7. Future section, 1215 to 1330. Apple u umlaut, e acute, o circumflex, e grave so, is Medell. And a genuine model? a umlaut circumflex, I grave, or a beautifully lit warning. Cities from Rio de Janeiro to La Paz to Mexico City have studied to the Medellin formula. Transit into forgotten neighborhoods, architecture as dignity, public utilities funding public good. But Medellin's planners themselves admit the hardest chapter isn't finished. The next fight isn't cartels or car bombs. It's making sure the people who survived the worst of it aren't priced out of the peace they helped build. If Medellin gets that right, it won't just be a case study. It will be proof that even the most broken cities on Earth aren't broken forever. 30 years ago, a child born in Comuna 13 was statistically more likely to die violently than almost any other child on the planet. Today, that same hillside has a cable car, an escalator, a library, and tourists taking photos of murals painted by the community itself. Medellin's real lesson was never about cocaine or cartels or even Pablo Escobar. It's about what happens when a city decides that its poorest neighborhoods deserve its best buildings, not its least attention. Violence, it turns out, isn't just a police problem. Sometimes it's a design problem, and if a city built on cocaine money and buried in car bombs can rebuild itself with libraries and cable cars, then maybe the real question isn't whether Medellin can be trusted as a model. It's why more cities haven't tried.